Imagine trying to be romantic while your entire family, including grandma, is lying 3 feet away, fully awake, pretending not to hear anything, or picture having to keep all your clothes on during intimacy because showing skin was considered mortal sin. Welcome to the absolutely bizarre world of sex in ancient times where privacy didn't exist, bathing was optional, and the rules were stranger than fiction today. We're diving into the most awkward, hilarious, and insane ways our ancestors managed their love lives, and trust me, after hearing about ancient Rome's public fertility festivals, you'll never complain about modern dating again. Let's start with colonial America, where couples faced a dilemma. They needed to court each other, but privacy, that was basically witchcraft. Enter the bundling board, possibly the most awkward invention in romantic history. Picture this: young man in 1750 Pennsylvania. You finally get permission to spend time with your sweetheart. But there's a catch. You both have to lie in the same bed, fully clothed, with a wooden board dividing you down the middle like some kind of intimate Berlin Wall. Oh, and sometimes, just to be extra sure nothing happened, the girl would be sewn into a sack, up to her armpits. Yes, sewn into a sack. The parents would be in the same room, casually knitting, or reading the Bible while you try to have a romantic conversation through a plank of wood. Some families even tied the boys and girls together, or put him in a special courting bag that was basically a sleeping bag from hell. But this system had about a 30% failure rate. Turns out horny teenagers in the 1700s were just as creative as they are today. Who would have thought the bundling tradition actually came from practical needs in colon? Houses were freezing cold, and fuel was expensive. Families couldn't afford to heat multiple rooms, so courting couples would share body heat under heavy quilts with that blessed board. Between them, of course, some historians found birds of boards that were suspiciously worn down in certain spots, suggesting that young lovers found ways to at least hold hands through convenient imperfections. In the Wood in Wales, they had an even stranger version called car. And why greely or loving in bed, the boy would climb through the girl's window at night with full parental permission and spend the night talking to her while she remained wrapped up like a human burrito if he could climb in quietly, turn off and prove his good intentions by keeping his hands to himself all night. He was considered worthy husband material. One Welsh diarist from 1798 wrote that his future father-in-law actually helped him with the latter, then stood below the window shouting helpful advice like, "Remember, boy, no touching, but do compliment her needlework." The Dutch in New York took bundling to another level of awkwardness with the questing tradition. Not only was there a board, but the girl's mother would literally sit at the foot of the bed, knitting and occasionally clearing her throat loudly. If she heard too much giggling, one Dutch immigrant wrote home to Amsterdam in 1680 saying the custom, "Here are most peculiar. I spent 6 hours discussing cheese making with my beloved Greta, while her mother sat watching us like a hawk guards its eggs. My legs were bound with rope, and Greta was wrapped in so many blankets, she resembled a large sausage." Romance in the New World is quite different from what we knew. If you think bundling boards were weird, buckle up for ancient Rome, where subtlety was apparently illegal. Every March, Romans celebrated Luper, a fertility festival that makes modern Vegas look like a church picnic. Picture this insanity. Young men would strip naked, sacrifice a goat, then make whips from the goat skin. Still naked, they'd run through the sweeping any woman who wanted to get pregnant that year, and women lined up for this. They'd literally hold out their hands to get whipped by naked dudes covered in sacrificial goat blood because they believed it would make them fertile. But wait, it gets better. Roman wedding nights were a public affair. The bride would be escorted to the bedroom by a parade of wedding guests singing obscene songs, and I mean obscene. We have surviving lyrics that would make a sailor blush. The guests would stand outside the bedroom door, banging pots and pans, shouting advice and dirty jokes, while the couple tried to consummate. One Roman writer, Catullus, wrote a wedding song that included the line boy. What's to the children? Your days of playing with nuts are over. Now you must play with something else. This was considered appropriate. Wedding music. The Romans also had a charming tradition called fastening verses, essentially ancient rap battles about genital. What were performed at weddings, professional poets would be hired to create the most creatively obscene rhymes about the bride and groom's upcoming activities. The raunchier, the verses, the better the marriage was supposed to be. We have surviving examples. Does that include detailed descriptions of what the groom should do with various vegetables? I'm not making this up. There's an entire verse about turnips that archaeologists still blush when translating during the festival of Floralia. Related to the goddess Flora, prostitutes would perform naked in the theater, and the audience would throw lupins and beans at them, which supposedly increased everyone's fertility. Regular citizens would wear flower crowns and nothing. What else dancing through the streets? And what one Christian writer later described as a most shameful display of human rutting that would make dogs blush. The festival lasted 6 days, and by the end, the entire city of Rome basically turned into one giant flower-covered orgy. Augustus Caesar once tried to tone it down, but the people nearly rioted, so he gave up and just moved his mother out of the city for the week. But perhaps the most insane Roman bedroom custom was the pronuba tradition. This was an older married woman who would literally guide the bride's hand to touch the groom's genitals for the first time in front of witnesses to ensure she knew what she was dealing. With the pronuba would then give detailed instructions about what to do next, sometimes with helpful hand gestures and occasionally with carved wooden visual aids. One Roman bride, Julia Felix, left graffiti in. Play complaining that her pronuba brought a disturbingly realistic wooden model and spent 2 hours explaining techniques while her new husband stood there turning various shades of purple. Now, let's talk about the Middle Ages, where the Catholic Church had very specific opinions about bedroom activities. Enter the chemise cagoule, possibly the least sexy garment ever invented. This was essentially a massive nightgown with a strategically placed, just a hole that's it. Couples would wear these tent-like garments that covered everything except the absolute minimum necessary for procreation. The church actually recommended this because they believed seeing your spouse naked would lead to excessive lust, which was a sin even within marriage. But here's where it gets absolutely bonkers. The church had an official calendar of when you could and couldn't be intimate. Not on Sundays, the Lord's Day. Not on Wednesdays or Fridays. Fasting days. Not during Lent, 40 days. Not during Advent, 4 weeks. Not during Pentecost. Not feast days. Not when the woman was menstruating, pregnant, or nursing. Do the math, that left about 44 days a year when it was technically okay. And even then, you had to do it in the dark in the missionary position only. Without enjoying it too much, one priest actually suggested couples should recite prayers during the ACT to avoid sinful pleasure, medieval penitentials. Basically, sin price lists had incredibly specific punishments for every possible bedroom variation if you had relations while the woman was on top, 3 years of fasting on bread and water from behind, also 3 years standing up 7 years because apparently gravity offended. Add one medieval monk brother Gerald spent his entire life creating a 200-page manual detailing every possible position and its corresponding punishment. The manuscript still exists in the Vatican secret archives. Scholars who have read it say it's accidentally the most comprehensive medieval sex manual ever written. The church was so obsessed with bedroom regulation that they created special furniture to prevent sin. The procreation bed had a board with a "engage in the approved position." Some monasteries actually manufactured these beds as a source of income. There's a surviving receipt from 1287 where the Abbey of Cluny sold 47 virtue preservation beds to the Duke of Burgundy. For his daughter's dowries, the beds came with instruction manuals written in Latin that explained how to use them while maintaining proper Christian modesty, but the absolute. Speak of medieval bedroom. Insanity was the practice of holy supervision. Some extremely devout couples would invite a priest to sit in their bedroom and read scripture, aloud during intimacy to ensure they didn't enjoy it too much. Saint Francesca of Rome allegedly had her confessor sit behind a screen in her bedroom for the first year of marriage, coughing loudly. If he suspected excessive enthusiasm, her husband Lorenzo later wrote in his diary that the experience was most effective in suppressing carnal desires, as nothing diminishes order, quite like Father Antonio reading Leviticus in his nasal voice, while one attempts to produce an air speaking of weird bedroom rules. Let's visit ancient